For photographer Julia Rendleman, poverty in America isn't an issue she keeps at arm's length. She uses photography to get up close, through the lens, showing us the gritty truth, using her gift to teach us through her photos, hoping that we see what she feels every time she takes a picture, which is exactly why we're talking to her today.
I know instantly when I've made a picture that's gonna work. It's hard to describe, but I just know. It feels satisfying to me in the moment that I've put something truthful in a little box.
And for the past 5 years, Julia has been covering that truth of Americans scraping to get by. Snapshots into the nearly 37.2 million Americans living in poverty, where any expense, a car repair, a hospital visit, or even a COVID test could be the difference between having a place to live and homelessness. And we can guarantee once you see Julia's photos, you're going to have a much clearer picture of what that number truly means. Julia, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's dive right in. What started you on this journey of documenting those that are struggling with housing insecurity?
I mean, quite simply, it was something that I saw happening in my community, and that was it. I know that housing and income insecurity are not new issues or new challenges in America, but I think there's always a benefit to highlighting the lived experiences of people dealing with the daily struggle. And you mentioned some statistics, and there are a lot of them about economic disparity in this country. But I think the thing that really drives home those statistics are those individual stories, and it highlights how devastating those statistics are.
And you know, what I loved about you interacting with these individuals is you made them feel like they weren't a statistic, like Brian House and Nikki Schools. Tell me why you chose this family to photograph and a little bit about their story.
Sure. Nikki and Brian, their story pushes back a little bit on that narrative that if we just work hard enough, we can achieve that American dream. Between the two of them, they work 3 jobs. Nikki works at Applebee's on the weekends and hopes to bring home $150 a shift. And during the week, she babysits for another girl. She brings home $85 a week from that. And Brian just got a job changing tires on big rigs. He makes $18 an hour, the most he's ever made in his life. So they have 3 jobs between them, but they still live at a hotel and they pay over $1,000 a month to stay there, which is actually equivalent to a mortgage for a house in that area with bedrooms. So that's why I chose them. They were also really open, and COVID affected them in a really unique way. You maybe wouldn't have think of how COVID affects people living on the edge, but I'll just tell this little story. Nikki got COVID probably at work, and she needed to test negative to return to work. So she afforded the first at-home test. Then her sister gave her a second test, but she was still positive. She could not afford the third test, and so opted to do the PCR test at a pharmacy, which is free, but the results take 3 days. Unfortunately, the results took 6 days. So that was an additional week of work that she couldn't go to work and make income because she couldn't afford that $20 test.
And that just puts it so in perspective, and you just think of how lucky we are in our workplace, you know, that we can be tested every day, and this family not being able to get a test, you know, impacts their livelihood in such a dramatic way. I mean, it's such an eye-opener. As also the 2 single moms that you followed, these photos in Birmingham, Alabama. Jane Johnson, she told you she knows she's a part of a statistic. Tell us more about her story.
Yeah, Jane lives with her son, King, and she was working at Amazon at the onset of the pandemic. But her son got COVID, and she actually had to take off a lot of work to care for him. And in that time, she lost her job. and then received an eviction notice, and they were living in the dark. The light bill went unpaid, and it was $1,000 to reconnect it. And if you remember, all the daycares were closed at that time. So she had to do something where she could take him to work. So she started delivering food for DoorDash to make ends meet. Still, they were living in the dark. And actually, the stimulus check came just in time. She used the entirety of that to reconnect her lights. And a nonprofit organization in Birmingham helped her pay her back rent. Her story is actually pretty hopeful. She's a trained doula, and she's working at a health clinic. She wants to be a nurse. She's saving up for that. But still, to make ends meet, she has to deliver for DoorDash with her son riding along in the back seat. And I just think that her story highlights how important a safety net is.
Wow. I love that she's saving up for nursing school. I love that she sees hope, and she's pushing forward. And then there was the other young single mother, homeless, her daughter hospitalized, Takiriel Jordan. Tell us about this story. Takiriel
experienced homelessness as a child, with her mother growing up with 8 kids, and that's a huge risk factor for being unhoused as an adult. And that's essentially what happened to Takiriel. She lost her job again after her daughter, Alasia, was in and out of the hospital with severe asthma, and was evicted. And they were living in her car. And then when she could afford to, when she was doing temp work, they would splurge for a hotel room. She also received help from a nonprofit called Youth Towers in Birmingham. They do a lot of things, but they have a really cool program where they help you find an apartment, pay 100% of the rent, and then gradually shift the responsibility back to the individual. So Takiriel is now paying 100% of her rent. But she lives with that anxiety and stress that if her daughter gets sick again, they're going to be back living in the car. And that just highlights for me some of the mental health and stress that is caused by living in poverty during a global pandemic.
You know, final question, Julia. How did you, I mean, it's so humbling to hear all these stories. How did you get these individuals to be comfortable with you, to allow you in to take these photos? Because no doubt this is a hard thing to talk about for them, and extremely humbling.
I would just say time and honesty, and a lot of times I would spend time with them and not even bring out my camera. And I also think, you know, all these women and Brian, they realize the value in sharing their story. And I think that they know they're not alone. And so we're actually really open and eager to share.
Well, time and honesty. I am going to remember those 2 words as I think about interviews that I do. Julia, thank you so much for sharing these personal stories. Nikki Schools, Brian House, Jane Johnson, Takiriel Jordan. They reflect the reality for millions of Americans living in poverty right now. We appreciate you so much for shining a light on them for us today. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.